Hello, book lovers, and welcome to another episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am so happy to be here with you again today. Every week, we travel the country, me along with my partner, Kimberly Hensel-Lorance, visiting independent booksellers and the authors who love them. And today, we are with our 100th independent bookseller in Buffalo, New York. We are at Talking Leaves Books with founder and owner Jonathan Welch. Jonathan, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. And we are with author Sandra Block. Sandra Block is a writer and a practicing neurologist. Her debut novel, Little Black Lies, was a finalist in the International Thriller Awards. She is also the author of The Girl Without a Name and The Secret Room, What Happened That Night, and her newest and fifth novel, Girl Overboard, launched yesterday. Sandra, welcome and congratulations. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Sandra, we're going to start off with you. We are here with Jonathan and Talking Leaves because you nominated them as your favorite and beloved indie bookseller. Tell us what's so great about them. Why did you choose Talking Leaves?
Well, I think that Talking Leaves is kind of synonymous with Buffalo. I didn't realize you opened in 1971, so I was 1 year old when that occurred. So maybe that's why it seems like it's always been an institution in Buffalo. And beyond that, on a personal level, with my first book, I did a book signing / little party there at their old store, which is they're now all in their Elmwood store. They've kind of consolidated that some time ago. But I just have really wonderful memories of that. I still have pictures from it, just it was a debut. You're only a debut author once, but it was just a wonderful, warm setting. And he's just supportive to authors out there. He's supportive to the local community. And there's just nowhere else I would have even thought to have picked.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Jonathan, one of the things that's unique about our program is that we're talking to authors alongside our independent booksellers. And you are an independent bookseller who has been in the biz since 1971. So you've seen a few things. I wonder if you would talk to us a little bit about that and, what kind of changes you've seen in book selling over the years. And I guess I would sort of maybe focus that in particular on what it is like for Sandra to bring a book out in 2022, as opposed to authors who were bringing books to market in the early 1970s.
A sea change, I'd have to say. I mean, in all kinds of ways. The distribution of the book in the book industry has changed dramatically in the time I've been doing this. So the speed with which we get books has changed a great deal. How customers have access to books has changed a great deal. If Sandra had published this book in 1971, we would probably not have known when the publication date was. We would probably not have even necessarily heard about the book until weeks or months afterward, unless we were in communication with her at that time. We might have had some idea, but schedules were all very different. Now everything is highly scheduled, so we know months in advance usually what day a book has come out, and not only do we, but many of our customers do now. One big change is that we're getting orders now for books that are coming out 6 to 8 months from now. That would never have happened. That wouldn't have even happened 10 years ago. It wouldn't, the public wouldn't have known, and often we wouldn't have known that early. So that's a major change. Just the amount of knowledge, the number of books that are available has dramatically increased over the years. During the whole time, but in the past 15 years or so, since print-on-demand publishing became so easy. There's probably close to 1 million books a year published in the United States now. So we have to try to sort through all of those. A store that used to say stock 15 or 20,000 books, which is what we do, and which is not actually huge in terms of an inventory, but it's sizable. But it used to be that if I were stocking 20,000 books, I might have 75 or 100,000 books a year to look through to get to that, and now it's like a million. So the work that we have to do to make the selections that we want for our customers is vastly different. There are more authors who are savvy about the whole process as well. So we get contacted all the time. I could probably count on my hand the number of people who contacted me in the first 10 years we were in business to say, I just wrote a book. Would you do something about it? And now, we get those kind of things probably several times a week, both from, relatively local or regional people who are self-publishing or publishing with a major house, and from people all over the country who just are, trying to get their book however they can out into the world. And, so they'll send us notes. I remember must have been 1974 or 5 that I got a letter from a writer named T. Corgeson Boyle. I'd never heard of it. It was his first book, but he sent a letter to a small independent bookstore in Buffalo because he'd gone to graduate school here for a year. And so he wanted the store to know, and he knew that the store existed. A few years later, we got a letter, similar out of the blue letter from, I'm blanking on her name. Anyway, another new author that was totally out of the blue. Like, we no connection to Buffalo, but this person decided that the only way her book was going to sell was to sort of get out into the world. And so she, on her own dime, I think while working as a secretary somewhere, just kind of used the stationery there and sent letters to, I don't know how many of us. And that, again, that was rare. Now it's really common. So those are some of the ways, I would say, selection, and then just the way that and then competition has changed greatly. I mean, the number of bookstores rose from the time we started up until the late 80s, and then it shrank, again, beginning with when Amazon sort of truly expanded and the chains expanded in the 1900s and early 1990s and early 2000s. And now the number of indie stores is rising again, relatively dramatically over the last 10 years. So
which is fabulous.
There's all kinds of changes like that that we've had to deal with and navigate through.
Well, I'm going to have some follow-up questions for you about that scene from a writer's point of view. But before I come to you with those, Sandra, I want to come back to you. So before we go down too far down the road of publishing and selling books, we're here to talk about one in particular. Tell us about Girl Overboard. I'd love to hear. Give us your elevator pitch. Tell us what this book is. Tell us what this book is about. And I want to remind the audience, Girl Overboard entered the world yesterday. It is available through Talking Leaves online. We're putting the link in the chat. So we are here for one reason, and that's to support indie booksellers. So click through, pick up the book, pick up some other books. Sandra, what's the book about?
Well, your elevator pitch is the dream cruise turns into a nightmare. Right. And you have to use that like movie voice, dream cruise turns into a nightmare. It's my first YA. It was really kind of fun to write because it was meant to be kind of short and fun and just light. It's still, I would say, a suspense thriller. And it's about Izzy, this girl, 16-year-old, kind of going on a cruise with her parents, doesn't want to be there. Typical kind of, I want to be home with my new boyfriend and not on the cruise with my boring parents. And she meets this girl on one of those teen hangout things. I don't know if anyone watching has been on cruises. I've been on, more than I'm a little embarrassed to admit the number I've been on. But anyway, they had these teen hangout things, and she meets this friend, Jade. It's kind of she's kind of a daredevil. And they have fun together until one day Jade disappears. And the question is, what happened to Jade? The other tagline is they say she fell, don't believe them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the mystery and the suspense, and she has to kind of navigate pun intended, the waters of this whole investigation, while at the same time fending off sure death and threats against her life and her family's life.
It's a really compelling pitch. A couple of things I want to follow up on with you on that. So, a lot of the people who follow this show are themselves aspiring writers. People are oftentimes very interested in the nuts and the bolts of publishing. So, two quick questions. First of all, you are a thriller writer. Your debut was a finalist in the International Thriller Awards. You just mentioned that this, although pitched to a younger audience, is still a thriller. What does it mean to be a thriller? I mean, I hear the mystery in what you're talking about, like what happened to Jade and like what happened to the disappearance. What makes a book a thriller? What's the key to writing a thriller?
I guess the key to writing a thriller would be the idea that it's not just a whodunit, that you're actually having a sense of fear and a sense of dread in the book. It's not horror in the sense that there's not any paranormal kind of anything like that, but there's a definite sense of fear, and that's the mood of the book that I think makes it a thriller versus just a mystery.
Something sort of impending and ominous. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Got it.
That should be the way the character feels, but maybe even more the reader feels. You want them involved in turning the pages because they're worried about what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. And you have made this shift to writing a YA thriller, which I think is interesting. And my debut was marketed as a YA novel, and I've actually, it's funny. I feel like I've known a lot of YA authors who have gone in the direction of writing for adults. I feel like I know fewer people who have gone in the other direction, I think. And I wonder if you would just say a little bit about why you decided to write a YA book, and what was that like for you? What was the difference? Was it just about adopting a different voice? Was it about taking the edge off of some of the harsher content? What did it mean to kind of shift into YA?
So the reason I shifted to YA was very serendipitous. My agent said, "Do you happen," just threw off this email kind of thing, "Hey, do you happen to have any YA thriller ideas?" And I had zero YA thriller ideas because I never thought of writing YA really. So of course I was like, sure, I have YA thriller ideas. And I wrote up a bunch, and the one that I thought was the cheesiest that I almost didn't include was the one about a cruise. So of course, like 10 minutes later, they loved the cruise one, and this is because they were trying to get some more thrillers for their imprint. And they were asking some of their editors who have thriller writers, are people out there writing, do you have any good writers that this would kind of fit the bill? So they said, write 20 pages. And my agent said, write them kind of quick, like we want to jump on this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm the type of person who I stare at my quill a lot. Like I don't really write quickly. So this wasn't my usual mode at all, but I went ahead and said, all right. And as you said, it was really the voice that worked for me. Izzy started talking right away. I just followed her lead. She had a pretty strong voice. I could really relate to it. And then, that's kind of where it led, and they liked the 20 pages, and we had an offer pretty soon, which again is not something that usually happens to me. So I think that was, it was great. It was exciting. As for the edgier stuff, yeah, that's another thing that I've had to kind of, rein back swearing. Not that I swear a ton in my novels, but, you swear a little and you see the F word on the page, and it looks much, much stronger than it does in just talking in regular conversation, especially in a YA novel. Yeah. And then obviously pulling back some of the darker, and I tend to go pretty dark if anyone's read my first few novels. I mean, there's some darkness in there. So I definitely pulled back on that, and that was fine too.
Yeah. Wow. So a couple of questions that are coming to mind, but you mentioned you got a fast offer on this. You didn't just get a fast offer. I believe you got it from Penguin Random House. Is that correct? So
Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, that's not just an offer. It's a pretty major offer.
it's a cool offer. Yes,
Good
it's
day.
great.
It's a
Yeah,
good day. It's a good day
yeah.
in a writer's life. Jonathan, about back to you with that. So, give us the bad news. Sandra's obviously having success here. I'm an author. Many of the people who watch the show are authors. When you talked about what you did a few minutes ago, in terms of the explosion in the number of books coming to market and so on, and the promotional activity, is it harder for authors to break through? Is it harder for new voices to be heard today than it was, in the 1970s, in the 1980s? Are writers' lives harder now, or has it always been like this?
I think it's a hard question. I mean, on some level, I think writers' lives are always hard, except for a few. I mean, when you reach a level of success, it's not hard anymore. I mean, the writing is probably always hard, although clearly for some writers, even that's not hard, it seems. But I think, I mean, it's interesting. I could say, 40 years ago, it would be harder to find out about new books because even though there were fewer of them, the ways that writers could reach us were less.
Mm.
There were, in fact, oddly enough, more sales reps among the at that time, say 10 publishing houses, 10 large publishing houses, and the smaller houses had very little representation. So when we were looking for those, and I should say that our stores kind of always specialized on small press and sort of out of the way books more than mainstream books. As part of our founding, it was like we were going to be the place that you got the books that you couldn't find anywhere else. And so it's changed a little bit. Now you find the books that you find everywhere else here as well, but we still focus on that. So we focus a lot on small press and books from the margins, from unrepresented and underrepresented communities of writers and readers. So we had a hard time finding a lot of those books in the early years. That got easier over time because of the changes in book distribution. It just, a lot of that consolidated, so it became easier for smaller presses to piggyback on larger ones in a way, and to piggyback on each other to get information to us. And the big publishers, on the other hand, have consolidated. So now there's only, I mean, I think actually at some point I realized there were approximately 40 what we would call major publishers in the mid 70s, and now there's 5. So that much consolidation has happened. And if anybody who pays attention would know that about 20 to 25 of those are part of Random House now. 15 might be part of Hachette, and which didn't exist then. Whatever. So our access to those is not really shrunk, but we have fewer sales reps. We have less contact with them, partly because of where we are. I know stores in larger markets see sales reps constantly. We see them. We don't see them anymore. Usually it's almost all done by email and occasionally things like Zoom.
Mm.
And so we have an interesting sort of less contact. But the information is also way more widely available than it used to be. On the flip side of that, though, there's fewer review media, so it's harder for us to find out what other people are thinking about this book and find out what publishers are thinking about them. But there's still only 2 or 3 major national review medium, and like all of, our local paper is now entirely syndicated, non-local content. And I think that's true in many places. So it's harder to get a read on what happens. And on the other hand, social media has made it, we all know now of these stories of like writers who have been made by TikTok, right? Who I may have never even heard of, from presses large and small, who are suddenly, we have people coming in. Do you have this book? Well, no. How'd you find out about it? Well, we saw this thing on the internet, whatever. So it's harder. And to get back to your question about writers, I think it makes it harder for them too. I mean, you're in a much larger pool. The water is both deeper and shallower at the same time. I mean, there's a lot more deep water, but there's a whole lot of shallow water. And so it's hard to sort of sort it all out. And I think what we as indies do is we do the best we can at sorting them out with our own taste connecting with our customers' taste and our perceived the perceived taste of our customers, and then every stream that we have of information that can lead us to say, okay, this is a book that we want, but we can safely hold maybe 20,000 books in our store, and there's a million of them new, and then all the stuff we want to keep that we love. Obviously there's books, of our 20,000 books, probably 8 to 10 at least are books that have been around for 3 or more years, not on our shelves, but in print, and that we want to keep, that we want our customers to be able to continue to have access to. So it's hard.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess sort of a follow-up question about that. So Sandra and I are sort of in the position of being writers, and I think that for us, the market is just always so opaque, So Sandra just had the wonderful experience of being surprised by a quick offer from PRH, and those are great moments. I think, on the other hand, there's also these moments when you send things out or you put things out, and it's
absolutely. Years I had before that, a couple of years of a lot of misfires,
Yeah.
Switching to another genre that didn't quite work out, even though I loved the book. Having another one where I felt like it wasn't really the top of my game and we didn't even send it out. So it's just, it's tough. I think to make a living as a writer, sadly, I don't want to pour wet water on anyone's dreams, but it's difficult. I definitely am happy that I'm keeping my day job, because it would be pretty stressful to try to feed the family on, a writing career.
Oh, absolutely. Well, actually, let's talk about that for a second. Let's go in that direction for a second, because you do have a day job, and you are a neurologist. And we actually had another writer neurologist on a few months ago. We had Melody Winauer, author of Anticipation, she's at Columbia, and a novelist neurologist. My day job is as a neuropsychologist, and then I write novels by night. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about your day job and the intersection, if any, between that and your secret identity as a novelist.
Well, my day job, I do two things mainly. I do sleep medicine for Buffalo Medical Group, and then I do intraoperative monitoring. So there are surgeries that are going on, not right now, but surgeries that go on where I'm following waves, electrical waves, and making sure that they look okay. So those are my two main things that I do during the day. And I do have a funny intersection story. There's not a lot of intersection, although anytime a person comes in with a book, a patient, I'm like, oh, what are you reading? What do you like to read? They tell me what they read before bed, and they probably wonder why I'm just so, kind of like butting in on their stuff. But there was one patient that came in because she told me she wondered if I could sort of channel Zoe Goldman, who's a psychiatrist, in my novel for her and her, problems. And it's literally the only time I've been completely speechless. I sat there with my mouth open for like 30 seconds and then said, I just don't think that's going to work, and gave her some other great names. And but that was the only thing where I've had a very bizarro kind of intersection of my writing career and my working career. Well, patients know, and they'll give me books to sign, and
they'll give you things to sign. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty cool. But wait, let me ask you something. So, your specialization. You're working with patients who are oftentimes either asleep or anesthetized. So you're doing this work with often unconscious patients. Obviously it's very important work, but it requires this sort of like very, especially like the interoperative monitoring, like this sort of like sustained attention to fine detail over long periods of time. You just must have like great concentration, but it's like, it is, I'm just sort of like, in my mind, I'm contrasting that work with like writing thrillers, with like writing books, which like by definition have to be intensely exciting, which have things like, kids disappearing from cruises and stuff. I mean, do you sort of feel like there's a little bit of like a yin yang with these two parts of your life?
I've never really thought of it that way. I think um, in terms of what I do with intraoperative monitoring, that is a little different. That's a little more, it's very specialized.
Hmm.
In terms of sleep, that's specialized too. But I see patients, 2 days a week for, many hours, and you're writing notes every day. And I actually wrote like an article on this, how you're basically following these patients and you're writing notes in them and you're describing what they're saying, and you almost start writing a novel every day.
Mm,
So there is some overlap there
yeah.
in terms of being a writer. Now, being a thriller writer, yeah, I don't try to kill any of my patients, and so I could see that there's some contrast there for sure.
You don't want them to have a sense of impending doom.
No,
But-
that doesn't get good reviews on
oh no.
on health grades or anything like that. So
Oh my gosh, Jonathan, we're talking a lot about genre. We're talking about thriller. We're talking about YA. I'd love to hear sort of you have had a long-term take. I mean, I would imagine that for YA in particular, that when you first started bookselling, it was probably, I don't even know if there was a separate YA shelf. I mean, what's been there were books, there were sort of books that were pitched to young audiences, but what's been the evolution of that genre, and how do you see that over time?
Well, it's part of the larger sort of evolution of children's literature, I think, which, as a category sort of has developed kind of slowly over the past, I don't know, starting sometime in the 1870s or 80s. But people like Judy Bloom's writing in the 60s were the first, I think, to write books that sort of address teen issues, and that's one evolution. They used to be called teen books, and now they're called young adult books. And I think that's partly just, that the readers want to feel more grown up, and in some ways they are, in the last 50 or 60 years, I would say probably in the last 20. And YA as a category, I think, is not much more than 2 decades old. I think before that, in our store and most stores, we had like sort of middle grade and then the next level up. And at some point that became young adult, but for a long time it was teen or high school or, something. And one big change is that now, and this is relatively recent, that people who grew up reading these teen and young adult books continue to read them into their way past their teen years, way past their quote unquote young adult years, whenever that ends. I don't know. I don't know if there's an end period for young adult in the way things are categorized. When we started, I think we used to put books that were sort of for older kids would be in the regular literature section, right? And they were often classics, right? I mean, that's what happened. Schools would assign classic literature to teenagers. And there weren't a lot of books about their own lives, right? There weren't books that sort of addressed what it meant to be a person of that age in that era. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously one of the things that I think Judy Bloom and others kind of changed over those, beginning in the 60s and 70s. I don't know. It's really hard. I would say that children's literature in the last 20 years or so has been the growth area in publishing for various reasons, largely marketing stuff. I mean and I think it even predates Harry Potter, but certainly that boom changed a lot. That there was a big reading boom that happened as a result of those books, so now. There's a lot of crossover. So I've noticed in a lot of stores, we haven't done this yet, that they actually put the young adult books kind of next to the adult books rather than next to the children's books. So they're like, they're not, we always had them sort of as a bridge in the places where we could. So there's a lot of changes that are marketing related. The other thing is that a lot of writers who used to write adult books, quote unquote adult books, are now drifting in, as Sandra is in a way, into young adult. Mm-hmm. And that's partly pressure from the publishers who want that perspective maybe of an older person writing And although I think it's a challenge to do that, you have to be, you can be unhip real fast, right? You have to be very careful
You
if
really
you're
can.
writing for an audience like that, because they're going to catch you and
Oh yeah.
they're not going to want to read.
I have a funny thing there. I had in the one I was writing now, my character was looking for her wallet to give, her friend money for gas, and then I'm like, wait, they don't have a wallet even. They don't have money. It'd be like, do you want me to Venmo you? So I had to change it. I mean, I was just thinking like that's not, it's not accurate. So you're right. You can sound pretty stupid pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot. I mean, I think when you make that crossover, you have to be very careful. And I think, I mean, actually, I think even things change so fast that I think even somebody in their 20s writing a book about a teenager might have issues like that they just are going to have to address or be laughed at when the book comes out. And I think one of the things there is that there are probably, I'm just guessing at this, but I think that's one of the places where there's a lot of younger editors in the publishing world where the changeover in publishing has always been slow for the most part. And I think in some cases like that, it's probably sped up because they realize that's where the money is, which is, it's a whole other thing that culturally teens have money now. I didn't have any money as a teenager.
Yeah.
Even I worked as a teenager, but I still didn't have any money. And I certainly didn't have any disposable money. I mean, it was all for, for my own circumstances, or sort of family stuff and this idea they had to go to school, those kinds of things. I didn't have spending money. And now clearly a lot of kids from, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 and up have spending money. And they spend it. And they spend it in ways that are not the same that again, I would have bought a candy bar probably, that's not what happens anymore. So they have culturally, there's a whole lot of changes that are impacting what happens in books and what happens about books and who buys them. I mean, the reality is we have a lot of kids who are avid readers and buy their own books, but a lot of them stop reading at some point. Sometimes, if we're lucky, they come back, but they hit a sort of a point where it's like, I'm done. I've got video games, I've got whatever it is else that I'm doing. I don't need to read anymore.
Yeah. You're making some great points, especially with sort of the income, the disposable income on the parts of younger people. I hadn't really thought about that. Quick note to the audience. Jonathan mentions Judy Bloom. We never miss a chance to mention that Judy Bloom was a guest on our show in 2020. We've put the link to the Kimberly Lawrence's conversation with her in the chat because it's a classic. And while you're there,
she's a bookseller, by the way, as you.
Yeah, well, that's why we had her.
Yeah.
That's why she was representing the store that she runs in Key West. So that's right. And talking about being a bookseller, and she was wonderful. So the link is there, and while you're there, also click the link to Talk and Leaves, pick up a copy of Girl Overboard. Sandra, give our aspiring writers some help. So it is always a little bit humbling when we have writers on the show who are, very productive writers. Again, this is your fifth published novel. You are combining that with a very demanding day job. I don't know what else you have going on. I don't know if I keep teenagers around my own teenagers around my house because it helps me to write YA. But I don't know if you've got other family stuff going on. But how do you do it? When do you write? How do you keep going? What's your secret?
Well, I didn't for a while. I wanted to always kind of wanted to be a writer, and I started trying in my 20s during my residency, which was very difficult, especially I had a new baby. And I didn't get any representation, so I didn't have an agent. So 20 years later, I sort of decided to try it again. So if that makes anyone feel any better, for 20 years, I took my ball and went home and just lived my life and wanted to write, but really felt like I couldn't. And, so you can, and it's okay. Anytime you want to, you can. And part of what became helpful for me to be able to start to really write and really make that more of a serious commitment was carving some time out. And in my first book, I really just took a half hour every morning and wrote.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I woke up not even that early. I woke up at like 6 a.m., wrote for a half an hour. And throughout my life, I've always been a night owl. I still kind of am, but I would find at 9, 8, 10 p.m., whatever, I wanted to just like watch The Bachelor. I mean, I was really tired. I didn't have the mojo to start writing. So instead of looking at it as a personal failure, I thought maybe I should really try to find a time where I have more energy in the morning before I've done anything. So that change really made a huge difference for me. It can be something as simple as that. I also would recommend reading some books on writing. I was an English major, so I was like, oh, I know how to write a book. I know how to sell a book and get an agent. I was an English major. I'm so smart, right? Didn't work out so well.
And you were an English major at Harvard, we should tell the audience. So,
right, no
it's not
less,
just
right?
an English major. Like,
so I would just be so impressed, right?
Yeah.
So in the end, that really didn't work very well. And I had to humble myself and say, maybe I should learn a little bit about this.
Yeah.
And one of the books I really recommend, it's called Thanks, But This Isn't For Us. I think that's what it's called. It's written by an agent and an editor. And it says it's a not so gentle guide to getting off the slush pile, is what they say. And they gave a lot of good advice, a lot of concrete advice about writing, but also about, your query letter. And so I would really recommend that. That helped me greatly. When I tried it again, I got an agent in my second try. I think that's a lot of luck, but I think it helped that I kind of knew a little more what I was doing. So
that's great. That's great advice. Sandra, a question from the audience. Trisha wants to know, how did you decide on a cruise ship for a setting? Because they've always seemed unnatural and weird to her. Also to me, I'm kind of freaked out by cruise ships. Tell us about that decision.
Well, as I said, I had, a bunch of other ones, which I thought would be more, one was in a ski lodge and one was set in, I don't even remember all of them, but I thought the one that was kind of the silliest one that they probably wouldn't go for was the cruise. I've gone on a lot of cruises. I happen to really love cruising. I mean, I know it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I like all the silly stuff. I like sitting and watching the water. I don't really do the midnight buffet thing, but I enjoy the whole experience. And when we went with my kids, my husband and we went on this cruise. It was the first one we went on together as a family. And they had this thing called the Fun Factory. And it turns out you could like dump your kids there for 2 hours and go and do your own stuff and be adults. And it was amazing. We were like, huh? A fun factory? And the kids even wanted to go there. So, I'm a little tongue in cheek, but we enjoy cruising. So to me, it wasn't a huge stretch, but I also thought in one way, it's kind of a good claustrophobic setting. It's kind of a closed room setting, if you think of it on a cruise. And the other thing is, for a YA novel, you don't have to worry about kids. Why would they be alone? How are they getting around to places? Like, it's their own little mini city that they have this sort of independence in. So it kind of was a perfect vehicle for a YA novel too. So I guess those are the reasons that it worked for me.
Yeah, those are actually great reasons. That's actually brilliant. And I did not know midnight buffet was a thing. So you might have sold me on my first cruise. I don't know. It sounds good. Jonathan, Girl Overboard is 1 day old. Obviously it was created earlier, but in the world it's 1 day old. So if Sandra's anything like me, this is sort of a time when she's scrutinizing any signs possible for how it's doing, sort of looking at the stars, looking at chicken entrails, looking at tarot cards, whatever will sort of tell her like what's going on. One of the things that you've talked about when you talk about the evolution of the industry is that in some ways there's so much more data, there's so much more information that you are looking at. as a veteran bookseller who has all of this information, can you tell when a book is going to be commercially successful? Are you surprised by books that break out and do you not see it coming? Are you able to read the signs? What is it like? Do you see more clearly than we do?
in your dreams and mine, I think. Um, again, it's interesting. I think there was a time when I thought that I could do that. The last 10 years or so have kind of totally obliterated that, I think, because just there's so many streams of information now that I just can't follow. I mean, I'm not a teenager or young adult, whatever. I am not savvy about web stuff, for instance, and I'm not really all that interested in it. Like I don't want to spend all my time on Facebook and Twitter and all those things. I know plenty of people who are in my industry and in my position who do, but I'm much more old fashioned. I still like to look at catalogs, for instance. I don't much anymore because I can't, but that's, so my ways of finding things are kind of traditional and old fashioned. And obviously I always have my ear to the ground, as I must. And so I find out about things in all kinds of ways. And I don't think we're ever terribly far behind. But I think it is harder. It's harder and harder to sort out what's going to work and what isn't. And even, for instance, one of the standbys was, okay, this person has written 3 books. So fourth one, and they've done okay. So the fourth one is safe. We can get, X number of copies of that. And then you find out that, well, no, the fourth one that was it. That's that person's career is done. Sorry. And in other cases, it's like, well, we're not going to get this. A great example is Gillian Flynn's books. We had tried the first 2 of those books, hadn't sold them at all. So I didn't buy Gone Girl for our store when it came out. It's like, we gave her a chance, right? Well, so 3 weeks later, it's like, where's that book? Why don't you have it, right? And I could tell you lots of stories like that. And I could tell you other stories like, we carried Elizabeth Gilbert's book in hardcover. Nobody wanted that either. And then it turned out paperback, and within weeks it was selling hundreds of thousands of copies or whatever. It's just, there's no real way to know, and there's no real pattern that you can follow. I mean, I think we all try to, and we do that by paying as much attention as we can to all the details that we can. But it's very much the data is only useful to, I think, again, I mean, look at, everything now in terms of the internet is driven by data. All the algorithms that Amazon and B&N and all those bigger companies use, they're no better than we are, and in some cases much worse using that. So I don't think there's any like surefire answer, and I think it's all about paying attention and then trying to respond quickly when you have to, and that's something we can do better now. I mean, distribution makes it easier to get stuff that you missed quickly if you missed it, but also people have less patience. I mean, it used to be that people would wait a month to order a book because it took a month, and now if you don't have it yesterday, they're gone. They don't, it's like, why don't you have this now? And so again, you're trying to juggle your sense of what you have to have and what you can sort of safely wait on, because that there's only 1 or 2 people who want it, and they'll be patient. They'll say, okay, I don't need to read this yesterday or today. I can wait till next week if that's how long it takes you to get it. So we juggle all the time in that way. And I think I don't see a way around that. There's a kind of art and skill to it. And I think those of us who've been around a long time, presumably do it a little better than those who haven't, but I'm not even sure I can claim that. But I think that's probably the closest thing I can claim to a skill that we might have that others don't.
It's an adventure. It's always an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
We've come to the point of the show where we're going to sell some books. And sort of the online audience, again, I will remind you, we love doing this show. And we're here for one reason, and that's to support indie booksellers. So we're going to have links in the chat to all the books we mentioned so that you can buy them, not from a big online retailer that we all know about, not from a big box, but from Talking Leaves Books in Buffalo, New York. So Jonathan, you are the pro, so we're going to start with you. Can you tell us maybe a couple books that you're excited about right now or that you think people should know about?
Well, I can tell you one for sure, which is very self-interested in a way, but it's a book about bookstores, and it's called In Praise of Good Bookstores. It's written by a bookseller. It's published by Princeton University Press. The author is Jeff Deutsch, who is the manager of one of the best bookstores in the country, the Seminary Co-op in Chicago, Illinois. Founded in the early '60s by students at the University of Chicago, and still sort of vaguely connected to the university, but certainly very near it. And wonderful bookstore. And Jeff's book is kind of about what makes a wonderful bookstore, and why they're important, why independent bookstores in particular are important, and what their role is and what it can be, and how we need to change basically change the economics of this business to make it more viable for stores, really good bookstores, to survive, because many of them don't. And that's a financial proposition. So he has suggestions about that. Anyway, it's also an extremely learned book, but it's good. It's a relatively quick read. So that's something that I'm very excited about. It came out a couple of weeks ago.
Fabulous.
So that's one. I as a reader, I kind of read around all the time and don't finish a lot of things, because my role as a buyer and sort of monitor of all this stuff is I sample books all the time and then just kind of hope that they're as good as I think they are. And so we started as a poetry store, so poetry is one of the things that I pay a lot of attention to. And then it's sort of more experimental and non-traditional fiction. I'm very interested in a new book called Trust by Hector Tobar that just also came out, I think, yesterday, published, I think, by Riverhead. So I'll leave it those two books right now for suggestions. And obviously, you can look on our website. All of our booksellers have suggestions, not updated as frequently as we would like them to, but there are suggestions there from the 5 or 6 booksellers here. So if watchers tonight or today are interested, they can certainly go to our website and take a look and see what folks here think is good and worthy of your attention.
Fabulous. And the links are in the chat for Trust and for In Praise of Good Bookstores. Sandra, other than Girl Overboard, what should people be picking up?
Well, I just read one which I really liked and did not. It's not that I didn't expect to like it. I just didn't know what to expect. It's called The Admissions by Meg Mitchell Moore. And it's about a family and kind of the messiness of this suburban family, with one daughter trying to get into college, the other one kind of doing Irish dancing, the mother doing real estate, the father doing his thing, and all of the lies that they've told each other and that they are telling each other to try to survive, and the way they negotiate that and come out stronger.
Yeah.
So, and it sounds it's humorous too. It's a funny book. It's well written, so I really enjoyed it. That was a really good book. I'm about to read one, Riley Sager, Survive the Night, it's called. I haven't read it yet, but it's got really good reviews, and Riley Sager's good. He's also an example of someone I think that rebuilt himself from the ashes a little bit and brought back a really successful career. So it's kind of interesting too.
Fabulous. Great recommendations. Thank you. And we're dropping the links in the chat. This time has flown by. Jonathan, it's time for me to come to you with our traditional final question, which is always for the bookseller, and it is always a fill in the blank. Being a successful independent bookseller is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
I guess I would say commitment. I think you have to be commitment and immersion. You really have to, you have to commit yourself to what you're doing. You have to believe in it. And you have to pay attention to all the details. I think that's where a lot of people fail in this business, who get into it out of a love of books, because that's why most of us get into it. But what you find pretty rapidly, once you're into it as a store rather than just as a reader or a writer or avid fan, is that it's work, and it's hard work, and it's detail oriented work, and it is overwhelming at times, and it's not like we sit around reading all the time.
Right.
You know, I said earlier, it's like I read much less than I would like to, but but I also I can probably talk to you about a lot of books that I've never that I've never read, because that's my job. And so I learn about books all the time in every way that I can. And I think that's one of the ways certainly that you can make a success in this business, is by just paying attention to all that stuff, and obviously paying attention to your customers. Ultimately, we're not selling books; we're selling a relationship between a store and a person. And if you can establish that relationship and build it with some trust and integrity, I think that you can survive. But that's the commitment. Is really, it's almost not about books. I mean, in some weird way, it's about building a relationship where people will trust you about what it is that you're doing. And I really think that's probably a doctor-patient thing too. It's like, it's a way to succeed in the world, is to just build lasting, trusting relationships, act with integrity, and do the best you can. And I think that's all we can ask of anybody.
It's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak with the two of you today. Thank you for being here. Jonathan Welch, Talking Leaf Books, Sandra Block, congratulations on Girl Overboard. This has been a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate you being here. To the online audience, thank you for being here for our 100th independent bookstore. Come back this time next week for the 101st. We're going to be with author Kimberly Brock down in Savannah, Georgia. So we're going to find out all about that. And until then, stay well and keep reading.